everyone, my name's Hannah and I'm a Programmes Manager at Your Consortium. I manage a programme called ESF Community Grants North Yorkshire, and I'm here today to train you on how to use our electronic paperwork system. So why is paperwork required on community grants? Well, community grants is ESF funded, which means paperwork is a requirement of the funding. It helps to identify whether the learner is eligible for the programme, and you will have to collect eligibility evidence to show us that. And it starts a dialogue with the learner around whether they've got any barriers or health conditions that you may be able to support them with. It helps to set clear goals and create a plan for what the learner wants to achieve on the programme. The data is used to inform future funding, track the learner's journey, and monitor partner performance. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, all of our paperwork was completed hard copy and posted to us. In 2020, we designed a new electronic system, which is hosted through IPEX, as a way to make completing the paperwork more accessible for people, particularly where delivery wasn't able to be happening face-to-face. It enables partners to complete learner paperwork completely online and is designed to be used across all electronic devices. So you can use it on your phone, tablet, laptop. It's really accessible. The forms are almost exactly the same as their paper predecessors. So if you've done community grants before, you'll recognise a lot of the questions that are asked. The paperwork is accessed through links. So there's several links depending on which form you need to access. And there's links that relate to the start paperwork and links that relate to the completion paperwork. Now for the start paperwork, there's these three links, the most important one being the start ILR and ILP, which is the main document that you'll need to complete as part of the entry process for learners. There is also a self-declaration form, which is to be completed if you're unable to get all of the relevant eligibility evidence to us with your start ILR. The duplication of funded activities declarations to be completed if a learner has been on community grants before. The way this paperwork is designed is so that it is completed by the tutor alongside the learner. So you may do that via the phone or face-to-face when that's acceptable, but it is a guided exercise. So it is meant to be completed by the tutor with the supervision of the tutor to make sure that all of the relevant boxes and all of the relevant information is collected. We ask that you don't send these links to learners, because it really is meant to be completed by the tutor in that way. It may be worth saving or bookmarking the links when you receive them so that you know where to access them quickly. We'll start by looking at the Start ILR and the ILP. Okay, so welcome to the Community Grants ILR and ILP. This is the first page of the document, and that's the participant privacy notice. So a privacy notice should identify who the data controller is, and in this project it is Humber Learning Consortium, who are the accountable body for the funding. It should also explain the purposes for which the learner's personal data is collected. And for this project, the main purpose is to report to the funders about who is accessing the projects. Now, to read more information on this, please visit the privacy notice link that's on this document here, the HLC Vol 1, and that will give you some more information about those things. Now, the way that this paperwork is designed is so that we can get electronic signatures from both the tutor and the learner. Now, in order for us to do this for the learner, all people signing up onto this project must have an email address. And if they don't have one, that will be the first thing that you'll have to create with them. Now, you'll see as we go through the paperwork, there is a box at the end for you to pop the email address of the learner for that signature page to get sent to them. They will also be asked to pop their name and the date in here at the same time as they sign the forms. And that's just to agree that they're acknowledging the privacy notice details. Now, there are some boxes here where learners can opt in to things like case studies or usage of their images and things like that. Now, they don't have to tick any of these boxes if they don't want. But if we do come out and do a case study about your project and they're involved, we will need to make sure that these boxes are ticked. Okay, so this is the first page of the ILR with the learner's details on. So the first thing that you'll need to put in is your CG5 reference number. Now this will be in your contract or your award letter, and this will be CG5 YNY, then 3 numbers. Now your provider name. And then down here, we've got some of the learner's details. Now, these are quite easy to complete, so I'll just go ahead and complete these now. So as you'll see here, we've entered in an email address. Now, this is not actually a mandatory box. However, it is mandatory for learners to have an email address on this programme. As I previously mentioned, that's how they will receive the email that asks them to sign the paperwork. Now, this next section is all about their prior attainment, and that's the highest qualification that they hold before joining on this course. So, if they're entry-level qualifications, they may be GCSE, and you've got to put a subject that the learner must have that in. So if they've got a degree, that would be level 5, and we always need their subject that they've got that qualification in. Now, have you enrolled on ESF or community grants provision in this academic year? Now, learners who've enrolled on community grants before would not be eligible for community grants 5. However, if they've been on a different type of ESF funding, so that could be action towards inclusion or something else ESF, as long as it's not duplicating what they already are sort of learning on their other projects, then they may still be eligible, but it's always worth checking with us first. Are you currently attending any other training that is more than 8 hours a week? Now, again, it's not a problem if they are. Learners who are in full-time education would not be eligible for this funding. However, if they are in other training for 8 hours a week, as long as it's not duplicating the provision that they'll be getting on community grants, that's absolutely fine. And again, if you're unsure, just please check with us. Now, this is the section where your learner declares their learning difficulties or disabilities, and there's a yes or no option here. If the answer is yes, they will need to declare what is their primary learning difficulty or disability, and there is a selection, quite a large selection here to choose from. Now, if the learner does have multiple, they must select which one is the most profound. And again, if the learner has not been in the country for the last 3 years, they must still have the right to abode and take up employment opportunities in the UK. And that is something that we do request as eligibility evidence. Okay, so section 6 is eligibility checks. Now, in order to be eligible for this project, learners must be over 18, a legal resident of the UK, and unemployed or economically inactive. And we do require a 6-digit reference number that's from the evidence that you've seen to prove these 3 things. Now, the first box is employment status, and you'll see that the evidence types that are required are DWP or job centre letters. What you may know is if a learner is unemployed or inactive but not accessing the job centre, it's really difficult to prove that they are eligible for this course. And that's when you would need to complete a self-declaration form, which is the other link that was available on the previous slides. Now, if your learner is claiming benefits, you will probably find that the reference numbers would be their national insurance number. And that's the reference number that you would need to put in this box here. If you weren't able to supply a reference number and you were going to complete a self-declaration, you would just need to type self-declaration in this box here, because if you see, this is a mandatory box and it won't let you bypass this. So you'll need to type that in. If you are able to get a reference number, you will just have to put the last 6 digits of their national insurance number in here and select which one you've seen. Now, for legal residency, you do have various different evidence types that you can choose from. Now, what I would say is sometimes it's most beneficial to access the 6-digit reference number of the learner's full passport or birth or adoption certificate. And that's because actually you can supply that reference number for the age bracket as well. So if you're able to get their passport number, then you could pop it in this box here and this box down here for age. You'll see here that national insurance card is a type of evidence that we can accept as form of legal residency. But what you may or may not know is that actually this doesn't prove that they are a legal resident of the UK. So if you do put national insurance card, we wouldn't be able to accept that and we would have to ask for further information. So I would always advise partners to try and get their passport number or birth or adoption certificate. So for the purposes of this, I'm going to say that we've got their passport number. So we would just need the last 6 digits in here. And we could use the same evidence for this box here, as that's proving their legal residency and their age. Again, if you aren't able to fill any of these boxes out or collect any of the eligibility evidence, you will need to complete a self-declaration form, and you would just need to type self-declaration in these boxes. Now, if you scroll down, there is an other credible evidence section. And one thing that we can accept through this funding is a third-party referral. This must be sent to us though, and it must be from a reputable source. On that third-party referral, it must also confirm the learner's name, their age, whether they're a legal resident of the UK and their employment status. And if it doesn't evidence all of those things, we will come back to you and explain that it's not sufficient. Now, there is an other evidence box here, and there are other forms of evidence that you can collect. Now, even if you do collect any of these, we would still require you to complete a self-declaration form. So to save you collecting these and thinking that's enough, I would almost say if you weren't able to provide the relevant evidence for the different 3 sections, then just default to completing that self-declaration form. If there's anything that you think that we need to know in terms of their eligibility, you can pop it in here. If there's any questions that we then have, we can come directly to you with them. So section 7 is their household situation and learner monitoring. Now, the household situation is just a drop-down box, and you just need to select which one is the most relevant for the learner. The learner monitoring section is purely to report to the funders if any of your learners have or are any of these things. And the learners don't have to declare them if they don't feel comfortable. So section 8 is employment status. Say we're signing up onto the course today. The way that I would approach this section is yesterday, what situation was the learner in? So yesterday would be, if we were completing this on the 30th of March 2021, it would be the 29th of March 2021, which was yesterday's date. And yesterday I was not in paid employment or looking and available for work, or not in paid employment and not looking for or available to work. And they are unemployed or inactive. So we'll say yesterday I was unemployed. The length of unemployment, now this can be a guess from the learner. If they've been long-term unemployed, then you'd expect to be probably in one of these boxes. But it's okay for it to be an estimate. And if the learner's claiming any benefits, so if you've been able to supply us with employability evidence, we would expect you to be selecting whichever one is the learner is claiming. If the learner isn't claiming any benefits, you can just leave this blank. Okay, so we're just going to move on to the next section, which is the Learning Aim Information Part 2. Now, here you'd put in your delivery postcode, and that would be the postcode that you put in your application that you were going to deliver from. Now, this must be from North Yorkshire. If there were any queries at your application about your delivery location postcode, you just need to make sure that you definitely are using a postcode that is within North Yorkshire. So here you would put your guided learning hours, and again, that would be the amount of hours that you've said that you would work with learners on your project in your application, and it will be the amount that was agreed at negotiations with us when we contracted with you. So for this, we will put 30. Now, the date of initial assessment would be the day that you are completing the paperwork. So today is the 30th, the 30th of March 2021. And that's the date of the initial assessment. It is also the start date on your project. So the date of initial assessment and your start date must always match, and they must always be the date that you're completing this paperwork. Now, your planned end date should be the planned end date for the learner's journey on this project. So if you were going to do 30 hours with them, like I put earlier on, you would expect this project to be maybe a couple of months. So we will put March. Let's put July. Now for here, you've got your non-accredited AIM, and this you'll see here is a breakdown of AIM reference numbers and guided learning hours. Now you must select whichever one is relevant to the amount of guided learning hours that you'll be doing. So we put 30 for this training, so I will select this one, and that's your non-accredited AIM reference number. Now, if you are completing accredited learning, you will have a learning aim reference number, or an LAR, which is generated by the course that you're delivering. And you should know that if you are completing accredited learning. So you would put your LAR in there. And again, your course start date and planned end date. For this training, we will just stick with non-accredited. So if you were doing non-accredited, you would just leave this box blank. So by clicking next, it takes us to the individual learning plan, or the ILP as we often refer to it. And this is the section where we assess the learner's employability and personal skills, but also set goals and really talk about what the learner wants to achieve whilst they're on this project. So we'll start off by going through the employability skills. And this is where you would assess with the learner where they think they're at the moment with these individual drop downs. Now, the first one is obviously self-management. And you'll notice that each one has sort of a description underneath about what sort of things it could mean. Obviously, in relation to your project, these might be a little bit different, and you might want to describe them a little bit differently, and that's really up to you. It's really just to assess what the learner where the learner feels they're at the beginning of the course. Now, with these, we would want to see some sort of progression, so they will do these again on their completion forms. So we wouldn't expect to see all of them at good or excellent, because we would want to see that the learner has improved in different areas. So you'll see here, there is an any additional support needed box, and this is a mandatory box. So you are required to put something in here. You can sort of use your own initiative here. If there's something that you think that we need to know about, or something that you're going to be working on with the learner, for example, housing or benefits, you can pop it in this box. If there really is nothing that you are going to be exploring with the learner, you can just put NA in here. Now you will see here there's a course and activity title. You may or may not have put one in your application. If you haven't, then you can obviously think of one depending on what course you're delivering, or you can just call it something like Employability Programme. You'll see here there's a drop-down box. This covers the different areas of learning that we would expect to see as part of the funding. If your option is not covered here, you can put other and specify what particular field of learning you are exploring on your project. But normally we would say that it could be covered in one of these drop downs. Now here you'll see accreditation. So as we said, accredited or non-accredited course. If you are selecting accredited course, you would need to put what level that is in this box here. As we said, for this training, we are doing non-accredited courses. So you will see as we scroll down here, this is where we highlight the specific goals that the learners want to achieve whilst they're on their course with you. Now, these goals or learning aims must be SMART, so that's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. And there is guidance, which we will send you around if you need some more guidance on this. There is an example here, so I will learn how to say 10 short sentences in English by February 2020. And that's really great because it covers all of these points. So it's specific, it's measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. So I will give some examples here of what could be considered good quality learning aims. These goals are specifically around employability. If you are doing something a bit more creative or a bit different, you can certainly make them a little bit more exciting. Now, these personal aims are specific goals that the learner wants to achieve for themselves. They are different from the learning aims, which are more around SMART targets that can be realistically achieved in a certain time scale. But these are more things like developing confidence, timekeeping, and those sorts of things. So as you scroll down here, you will see that there's reference to the privacy notice. Now, this is the privacy notice that is issued by the ESFA, which are the funders. And this statement is basically a reference to that privacy notice. As I said at the beginning, a privacy notice should identify the data controller and explain the purposes for which the personal data is collected. There is, if you scroll down here, there is a link to the ESFA privacy notice, which you can read yourselves, or if the learner wants more information about where their data will be shared, they can definitely follow this link to find out that information. Now, there's some boxes here. It does say your information may be shared with third parties for education, training, employment, or wellbeing related purposes, including research. Now, these boxes are basically being allowing the learner to give authorization to the funders to contact them for those purposes. Now, they don't have to tick any of them, but if they want to agree to be contacted by the funders, they can select any of these boxes. Now, if you scroll down, you'll get to the declaration, which is basically saying that all of the information in this form is correct and accurate. You'll see here it says, I confirm I am legally able to reside in the UK during the period of ESF support, and I have received guidance and assessment in relation to choice and suitability of the learning programme. So it's basically saying that all of the information is correct and that the learner confirms that they are eligible for the support. Now, this is the part where we have to put the learner's information in order to generate a signature for them. Now, I will pop, I think we called learner one's email address in there. And obviously this would be an accurate and real email address, because the learner will have to follow a link to sign. Now, you can put a due date in here, and that's particularly good if you've got learners who maybe aren't great with their emails, it'll remind them to complete it by a certain date. So say we wanted it back by Friday, we could set a reminder and it would email the learner before to ask them to sign it if they haven't already. Now, this is the part where the tutor would sign, and you'll see here that it says, I declare that I've checked the information provided by the applicant and confirm that the individual is eligible for the funding and is able to commence a community grants programme. So it's basically saying that you as the tutor are happy that the learner is eligible for the funding. Now, in order to be able to sign this, you would click into this box here and draw your signature. For this purpose, I'll just draw a line, but obviously you would be signing it. You would sign it correctly. Now you'd enter your name in full here. For the purposes of this training, I will just put our organisation's name, but it should be your name, so the tutor's name. And I will press done. And what you'll see here is that it generates a photograph of the signature, your name, and the date and time that it has been signed. Now here you will put your email address. Now that's just to confirm that you as a tutor or staff member have an email address that could be contacted if there are any issues with the form. And what that means is the way that we correct errors on the form is that I can send it directly back to you to your email address to be able to do that. So you would put your email address in here. For the purposes of this training, I will just put now you will see that there is a box here that says send copy to email address. Now you should never tick this box. This box is here because it is part of the system, and we have requested that it gets removed because it is quite confusing. But basically what would happen is if you tick this box, you would be sending the learner's personal information to your email address, which would technically be a breach of GDPR. Now, I would advise you just never to tick this box. And if you do, obviously tell us straight away. Okay, so I'm just going to click submit here. And what it will do is ask you to check that the email address is correct for the learner. And if it's not correct, obviously you can go back into the form and change it. By pressing OK, it will submit the form. And that comes to a portal which we can then access. So that was the ILR and the ILP. We won't go through the other links for the start paperwork, the self-declaration form and the duplication of funded activities, because they are pretty straightforward. But if you do have any questions about either of those when you come to complete them, please do let us know. We're just going to go over some top tips that you should remember for completing the ILR and the ILP. So there is just one more area that we need to cover when we're talking about the start paperwork. So alongside the ILR and the ILP and all relevant eligibility information, we do also require a learner log or a session confirmation to show that the learner has actually attended the learning that's taken place with you. Now, when you sign up a learner, we will require a learner log or a session confirmation alongside their paperwork, and that can be sent to us directly. You won't be able to complete those via the electronic system. And that's because there are two ways of doing this, really. Now, if you are still delivering your session face-to-face and you're able to get learner signatures, now you may wish to do this on paper. So this is available as a template that you can print out for each learner and get them to populate the date, whatever the first activity is. So that should always be the initial assessment or the paperwork completion, how many hours they attended with you, and the learner signature. And the point of this is that it's completed every session. So after every session, they would sign it and say that they attended, a bit like a register. And the reason we need to collect this is because we need to know that the learners are actually attending the sessions. Now, if you are completing this on paper, you will be required to sign it. Now, it's important that you don't sign it until the learner completes. So we do not require you to sign this at the initial paperwork stage, but we do still require it to be completed and signed by the learner. Now, the other option alongside a learner log is a session confirmation. Now, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we found that getting signatures on learner logs was becoming increasingly difficult, and we had to adapt to where a learner log could not be signed. So if you are delivering your session remotely, or if you're not having face-to-face contact with learners, then you would need to complete this way. And basically what we ask of you is to contact the learner via email with a template like this. So do you agree that you attended the below session with us? The date of session, time spent in the session, and what activities were undertaken. Now you can set this out however you want. We just designed this as a table. If you'd like me to send you the exact information for this, I certainly can do. But if you just create a table in Outlook, you should be able to basically copy this. In order for us to accept this as an eligible session confirmation, the learner would need to reply to confirm that they definitely had attended the session. Now, please remember that the date of the session must match the date of the paperwork. What that means is that the date of the first initial session must be the same date that you have put on your start ILR or ILP. So it's the date of that initial session. And the activities undertaken would be the initial assessment or the start paperwork. Now, what we would need to receive is the email chain from yourself and the reply from the learner, because that's what confirms that the learner has attended. So we're happy for you to complete it either way, but you will have to submit one of the versions alongside your start paperwork. So that was the start paperwork, the ILR, ILP, and the learner log. I hope you stuck with us through that. We will now be running through the completion paperwork. The completion paperwork isn't as lengthy, so please stay with us. It might be though that you just want to learn about the start paperwork for now and want to come back to the completion paperwork, which is absolutely fine. And please remember, if you've got any questions at any point, I am always available on email or telephone for you to contact. So we'll now start doing some training on the completion paperwork. Now, as with the start paperwork, there are links that you will click through in order to be able to access the completion forms. Now, for the completion paperwork links, it is the completion ILR and ILP part 2, which is basically a carry-on from the forms that you completed with the learners at the start of the project. And it's assessing where they're at now once they're finishing on the project. There also is a confirmation of progression form, and this is what you need to complete if you want to claim a progression as an outcome on the project. So as part of this project, you will be set employment targets, and the way that you claim these, so if a learner goes into employment, education or self-employment, you will need to complete the confirmation of progression form in order to have them count as a progression on the course. So we will start by going through the completion ILR and ILP. Okay, so this is the form that you're taken to when you click on the ILR and ILP link. Now, the first thing that it's asking you for is your CG5 reference number. And as you remember, that'll be in your contract. It'll start CG5, YNY, and then have 3 digits. Now, you'll have your provider name, the learner's surname, and the learner's first name. You might remember from the start paperwork that you selected a learning aim, which was in relation to how many guided learning hours you were doing on your project. Now, for the start paperwork, for our example, we chose that we were doing 30 guided learning hours, and this was our learning aim reference number. So you would just select which one is relevant to the amount of guided learning hours you're doing. If you're doing accredited learning, you would have an accredited learning aim that would come with your accredited course, which you would put in here. Now you'll have a number of dates to put in here. So your learning actual end date. Now this is the date that the learner is finishing on the course. So let's say that today the learner is finishing on the course. Now that could be the 30th of March, 2021. Now in this instance, because we're going to do some training on progression as well, we will say that the learner has progressed into employment. Now, if the learner has achieved on the course, so that doesn't necessarily mean that they've progressed into an outcome, but they've completed on the course, so they've finished it for the length of time that you initially planned on, it would be completed and achieved. Now, if a learner was not able to sign the paperwork, you would need to put withdrawn, no achievement, because in order for us to exit a learner with a completed and achieved status, they will need to sign the paperwork. Again, if the learner has withdrawn and if they're not able to sign the paperwork, you just need to put a reason as to why here. And this bit here is their destination outcome. So if the learner has gone into employment, this would be the date that they start their employment. Now, the outcome start date, if they have gone into a progression, should always be after they exit the course. So if a learner says to you, oh, I've got a job and I start on the 4th of April, and it's the 30th of March, that would be fine. And that would be classed as an outcome. All outcomes need to be claimed within 28 days of finishing the course. And this is something that comes up time and time again. So if you've got any questions about that, please do come to us. So let's use that as an example. Their outcome start date, they start their job on the 4th of April, 2021. Now, if they're exiting without going into employment, say they are not in paid employment but looking, or one of the other options which isn't classed as a progression, this date should always be the day after the course finishes. So this would be the 31st of March 2021. So because this example, we are going into paid employment, we would select this option here. There are lots of different outcome options which you can select. What I would say is if the learner has gone into paid employment, education, or self-employment, but you're not actually able to collect the evidence for that, that wouldn't count as an outcome. So you would need to select something else if you weren't planning on claiming that as an outcome. If you have got a learner that has withdrawn, you can select other here. So you've got other outcome not listed or other outcome unable to contact learner. Now, if we scroll down, we get to the individual learning plan. Now, this is part 2 of the paperwork, the ILP that you completed with the learner at the start of their course. And as I said and as I said, with the entry paperwork, we want to see some progression. So we want to see that the learner has developed their skills with you. But also if they haven't, that's also okay. And maybe it's about providing detail in these boxes as to why they haven't achieved as much as they hoped to on the course. So I'll provide some examples now of the sorts of things that could be put in these boxes. You'll see that these examples are in relation to the learning and personal aims that you noted in your first start session with that learner. So you might have to go back and have a read as to what those learning and personal aims were before you do the completion paperwork. So you'll see with this box here, it says, please explain what progression routes and pathways have been discussed with you by your learning provider. Now, we would expect you, as part of the course and the project, to have discussed different routes and pathways with the learner. And that could be different employability options, or also ways for them to develop their skills, either whilst they're with you or after they're finished with you. Now, this tutor feedback box, it is for the tutor to complete alongside with the learner, and it is to get an insight as to how the learners felt on the course. You also can provide a little bit of feedback for the learner as well in that box, but it really is about understanding how they felt whilst they've been on their course with you. This form is to be completed by the provider, just like all of the other forms. So it might be that you do this as a guided discussion, as the learner won't necessarily be filling out these boxes. Now, as before, we will require a staff signature, and this is done in exactly the same way as previous forms. So you'd click into this box, you would draw your signature here. Obviously, for the purposes of this, I will just do a straight line. You'll enter your name in full, And again, for purposes of this, I'll just put our organisation's name, but it should be your name, so the tutor name, and then you would press done. We will also require a learner signature, especially if the learner has completed on the course and achieved. If the learner has withdrawn, we would still encourage you to try and get a signature from them, but we can process it unsigned because obviously you've probably lost touch with that learner. If there is absolutely no way that you are going to be able to get a signature and the learner doesn't necessarily want you to contact them, you can put your own details in here, and that will basically send it to you, and you can just put NA in the box or whatever you think's appropriate. For this, I will put our learners' details. So, and again, you can put a due date as to when you'd want this back to us by, and you can set a reminder, and this will email out learners a reminder to say that they haven't signed it and they need to. Now again, you would pop your email address in here, so that's the tutor email. For the purposes of this, I will just this in. And again, just like with the start paperwork, we wouldn't expect you to send a copy to your email address because it's sending learners information directly to your email, which isn't recommended. To submit, you would just press submit here. Again, it would ask you to check that this email is valid because this is the email that it will be sent to the learner for them to sign. If it is correct, you would just press OK. So the second form that you may be required to complete as part of the completion paperwork is the confirmation progression form. Now, this form would only need to be completed if you were claiming a progression, so you've got the evidence for the progression of a learner going into employment, further education, or self-employment. So in order for a progression to be eligible, the progression must start within 28 days of the learner's actual end date. So if you remember back on the previous form, that was the date that the learner completed the course. So if the learner completes the course today, their progression would need to be within 28 days of that date. It couldn't be before that date, it would have to be after. So to complete this form, you need your CG5 reference number. And as you remember, that will be CG5YMY and then 3 digits, your provider name, and your learner name. Now, we ask for the progression start date. Now, this is the date that the learner will start their outcome, so their progression. And whatever evidence we collect must show this progression start date, and it must match. So say the learner starts their job on the 4th of April. The contract or whatever we collect to evidence this must say that they start on the 4th of April. Now, as I said, these are the different forms of outcomes that you can claim through this funding, and you will have targets for employment and further education in your contracts. It does say here, without appropriate evidence, the outcome progression cannot be claimed. Now, alongside this form, you will be asked to upload relevant information, relevant evidence to evidence the outcome and the progression. So in order to provide us with details about their employment outcome, we would need the following information. these are the types of evidence which we would need you to upload to confirm that the learner's gone into employment. Now, that would be confirmation of employment from the employer, so it could be an email or a letter for the named individual, so for the learner, and it must include a start date, job title, and the employment address. And we would recommend that whatever, if it is an email, that it is it's got a valid signature which shows that it's from that employer. You can also collect a wage slip. With a wage slip, it's a little bit tricky sometimes because it's quite hard to establish the start date on there. So we would probably advise trying to get a contract of employment first, really, because this is something that you could supply us with the evidence once the learner has started the job. And the contract of employment does normally have a breakdown of the information that we need. So with employment, the most substantial forms of evidence you can collect are probably a confirmation of employment directly from the employer that covers the start date, job title, and employment address, or the contract of employment. A wage slip is also accepted, but as I said, it does make it quite difficult to work out the actual start date for the learner. Now, self-employment is another outcome that you can claim through this grant. You've got the options here, whether they're self-employed 16 hours a week or less than. Now, these are the sorts of evidence that we can collect. So a bank statement for a business account, registration with Companies House, or confirmation of self-employment, so a HMRC letter evidencing registration. Now, we have had feedback from partners to say that these are quite difficult to collect within the timeframes that are allocated for the progression, so within 28 days of the actual end date. And what I would say is, if you are struggling to get evidence for self-employment, but also any of these progression outcomes, please let us know, because we may be able to support you to make sure that these progressions are claimable. Now, another option that you can claim through the grant is into further education. Now, we will ask for the information about the education provider. So I'll just pop that in now. So you will notice here that these are the sorts of evidence we can accept as part of this funding. So evidence of enrolment or registration at a college or learning provider. So quite often when you register for a course, you might receive an email that does give the start date and the course information. So we can collect that, or a letter or email confirmation directly from the educational or training provider, basically confirming the start date and the type of course that the learner is going to be taking part in. Now, if the learner progresses internally, we will need to see evidence that they attended a minimum of 20 guided learning hours on their course. So some providers might offer training as an outcome directly through yourselves, and that is fine, but we will need to see evidence that they have attended, so a register or a timesheet where they sign in to say that that's what they've done, they've attended that session. Now, all evidence for outcomes will be sent directly to us. There isn't a way for you to upload them as part of this form. As with all of the other forms, there's the learner declaration, which you will put in the learner's information in order to generate them a signature. So as we did before, here is an overview of the completion paperwork and also the progression paperwork. So there is just one last thing. Alongside your completion paperwork, you must submit a completed learner log or session plan. And what that means is that it must evidence all of the sessions that the learner has attended. If you are doing a hard copy learner log, that will need to be signed by the learner for every session they've attended, but also by the tutor to confirm that it's accurate. If you're doing session confirmations via email, the learner needs to reply confirming that they have attended all of the sessions. So thank you so much for joining us today and sticking with us through this training. If you do have any questions at all about anything that's been covered, or if you just need us to go through things again, please do get in touch with us. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.